Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the Cluster 7 partner briefing session. This is the third of a number of partner briefings. And the aim of these partner briefings is not to talk about the topic itself. We are expecting that our partners already understand these things, but actually to see how our technology, and it varies from call to call, how our technology might be used to help you grow your business and develop your business. I am delighted to say that today I'm joined by Morten Sisted. Good morning, Morten.
Good morning, Tony.
And Morten is a director of F1 F9, and he's going to talk about his experience with Cluster 7 to date and his aspirations with how Cluster 7 might help him develop that. Morten, maybe just like to say a few words about yourself and F1 F9, please.
Well, we've been around for a while. I think this slide you can see tells you we started in '99, and we developed a particular methodology called the VAST standard, which I think distinguished itself from being very prescriptive and focusing particularly on transparency and just opening up the modeling world, I think, to a wider audience. And I think that ties in with what Cluster 7 is doing. This is about making models more accessible to a much wider audience. I think that's the prize. We also went out to India in 2005 to set up a modeling team there. That's 2/3 of our business, is building models for people. The other third is training people how to build better models. Excellent.
So, today we're stepping through some of these things. Can you just talk a little bit about the processes that you follow, the sort of ways you develop models with your clients? What's your methodology? How do you approach these things?
Well, maybe just to start by saying that it'll amuse some people on this call to have me speaking on a model assurance webinar, because we're not actually in the model assurance business, unlike some of our fellow professionals. But to Tony's question, I guess we are in it in the sense that we build models for people rather than check models. And as part of that building process, it's about adding assurance through the process. I guess most of our business is through rebuilding an existing model. So the way to look at that is people get a new model, and then, but also almost as a sort of as a freebie almost, they also, you could argue, get an audit of their old model because we have replicated it. If you put that in context of the sort of the history of the assurance model assurance industry, which started with well, I guess if you go right back, you might say there was just software. There was something like Spreadsheet Detective, I think was the name of one of the early review packages that would help you, see if best practice had been followed, but it didn't really tell you anything else. And then moved on to what was called cell-by-cell review, whereby, as the name suggests, someone would look through a model on its own terms and check it with reference to what the software had told him or her to focus on, but would then just go through and try from I guess a commercial perspective to make sense of the model. So you introduce the human being. So it started with some software, you could say, then you introduce a human reviewer, and then the second generation software model review is what some people call shadow modeling, where you replicate the model, either parts of it or fully in a separate tool. And you can see that the obvious advantages of that compared to cell by cell is that you are, in a sense, more independently checking the model. But to tie into what I said in terms of where we sit is you don't actually then hand over that shadow model to your client as an auditor. You still leave them with their their tool with some recommendations as how to remediate it, quite possibly. But I guess where it ties into what we do is that we do the replication, and we hand them a new tool, which we would like to think is generally better structured than the original tool, and this ties into the wider idea of assurance, right? I mean, assurance isn't just one-dimensional. It's not just getting someone to sign off a letter saying your model works. I mean, to me, assurance in the widest sense of the word comes from doing a whole raft of things, right? From getting management buy-in to training your people, to adopting a standard and all those sort of things.
When you get the model initially from the client and you're going to look at it because you're going to replicate it, what's the problems of understanding that model beginning? What do you grapple with at that time?
Gosh, I mean, it's a bit like being a detective, but we do. I wouldn't say we grapple so much as you know, we start from one end and then we work through it, and we try to replicate what's going on. You know, at that point, we don't really use a lot of software, I guess, if that's where you're going. I think that comes later, when we start to, when the new model's up and running, one of the first things we do is build in a track sheet.
Okay.
And this has been a hugely important process tool for us, which is really focusing on monitoring change very carefully in a very disciplined way. So you're right, actually, Tony. I think when we do receive a model in that needs rebuilding, the first thing we'll do is take a snapshot of the key results in that model, and that becomes the sort of base. Looking at your alpine picture here, that becomes base camp.
Yeah.
You know, where we say, right, these are the numbers we need to start from, and so we match base camp. We get to base camp, and then as we climb Mount Modeling Everest, it's about putting in a hold. Every time we feel we can't afford to fall, we will then fix another track point. We will put in another, you know, peg in the wall, so this process of track changes, which you know, using a Word document analogy, we're well accustomed to having the review facility within Word, but that's what's lacking in Excel. And there have been attempts by Microsoft to build it into Excel, but I'm not aware of anyone actually using it, or whether it's still there, and I even forget what it's called. But our, I guess, F1, F9's workaround has been to put in this inbuilt track sheet that helps us get comfort and get assurance in the model as it changes, and by understanding the changes, and sort of fast forward to Cluster 7's compare functionality. You know, what excites me is that this is now something that is, in a sense, externally available to the model, and also the way Cluster 7 is delivering it through a cloud-based platform, it is more easily adopted by people, by customers, not just by professionals such as us, but end clients as well.
Without trying to give away your secret sauce, because clearly, you know, some of your competitors are sitting on the line as well here. It's part of it also.
I thought this was all about sharing the secret sauce.
Well, not all of it, you know. Do you also sort of look at providing pictorial views, graphical views of how that model hangs together? Is that part of the process?
You know, we don't really. I think we'd like to, but the technology in the past has made that relatively difficult to draw a picture, and I know where you're going here.
Okay, good. I'm leading the horse.
Because for the audience here, what I saw for the first time within the Cluster 7 platform only last week was an ability to map a spreadsheet in a graphically very impressive way. So I believe you're going to come on to just show that. Yeah. But so yeah, to your point, yes, trying to see the wood for the trees has always been the challenge, and therefore trying to get some graphical sense, some graphical aid to overview the model has been something that's been on people's agenda for a long time. And F1, F9 itself invested in some software 10 years or 2004 called Code Tracer, and part of that was, you know, the purpose was exactly that, but in a sense we failed, we gave up, we don't really, it didn't fly, and so in that sense you are, you know, you're continuing that quest, as I see it.
You talked earlier about using your team in India and the UK, and you and other companies are using that model very successfully, of how you do that. From my simple perspective, the distance is useful and benefit because of time differences, but also a challenge of collaborating. So I assume that when people are developing models, you've got to collaborate internally as externally with the client. Can you share how you do that today, and what are the challenges of that process?
Yeah, and I'm just, you know, I'm trying to tie it into to software, but maybe that link will come. I mean, it's you know, it's the million-dollar question, which is how can you externalize the model building process from at one level a single person, what I call the egghead, you know, so the modeling as a tradition starts from the egghead, sort of rocket scientist who can both do the commercials of a complex finance transaction and also the equivalent amount of Excel coding. So I think it's, you know, Tony, in a sense, splitting the modeling process is challenging even within an organization, let alone across time zones and as we have with India. But I guess the key to making that work is to have a very clear sense of a common language or a common method, or as we use what's known as the FAST standard. So that is probably the key to collaboration, is that you speak the same type of XLEs.
So before we step on and we actually go and look at the product and things, are there any other thoughts or comments you just want to add, or should we move on?
Well, I just want to seed this one thought around assurance, which is, you know, how do you get real comfort from anything, you know? So I, you know, if you take something out of the box, you know, you bought a car or you bought a piece of software or you've had it audited, you know, is that sufficient assurance? And I would argue with models, it isn't, in my personal experience. I gain real comfort from a spreadsheet or a model or a tool like that by using it over time. And I was thinking on the way in this morning, what other analogies do I have for that? And sometimes it's when I've refitted the front wheel of my bicycle and I'm going down the hill quite fast, and I'm thinking, is it going to come off? You know, you just think that would be pretty terrible if I somehow hadn't fitted it properly. And in a sense, no amount of double checking and rechecking is necessarily going to add to your comfort. What happens is, over time, the more times, the longer, you know, that bike runs without the wheel coming off, the more comfort you get in it. And that's how I feel about models. And I think maybe that's particularly relevant to the, I guess, very bespoke, very sort of rapid application environment nature of building models, is that you know, I think it's almost, it's very, of course it's worthwhile doing your checks along the way, but I think we should maybe, as a profession, I think maybe we should grasp more seriously the additional idea of gaining comfort through monitoring change. And that's why I'm so excited about the Cluster 7 Compare tool. It allows us a way to really focus on monitoring change, and thereby gain assurance.
It was probably you who said this to me, but people said to me that most spreadsheets are inherited. When you go into an organization, and you get a spreadsheet. Most of them you haven't developed yourself, you've inherited from somebody else. So your analogy with the bicycle, or I'm thinking about buying a car in days of yore, you used to kick the tires. Why did you kick the tires? You wanted to see if the wheel was still on properly. That's your bike analogy. And people don't kick the tires on their spreadsheet. They use it for a few weeks, and if it doesn't break, it becomes more comfortable. That's not a particularly safe way to run a business, but that's how people look at it. But they do inherit those spreadsheets.
And the trouble is, they don't know if it's broken, right? I mean, I think there's an optimism bias in people. So if the answers look like kind of what you want them to look like, and the higher the better, you know, you will tend to accept them in a sort of absolute sense. But if you have actually really analyzed how that result has changed from the last time you changed the model or the time before that, then you're giving yourselves opportunity to say, actually, yes, that should have gone up, but that shouldn't, you know, or that should have gone down. And by the way, that's why and this is very counterintuitive to most Excel users, one of our first recommendations in our training is for people to turn off automatic recalculation, right? So Excel comes out of the box with the automatic recalc ticked. And when you tell people that, they look at you like you are mad, because that's surely the whole point of Excel, which is that when you change a number, everything updates automatically. And we're saying turn it off, because that is your one chance to get a cup of coffee and say, when I press the F9 button, which is the refresh, then this is what I think should happen to my key results. And when that doesn't happen, then you've learned something. Either you've learned something about your deal that you didn't understand, or you have found a bit of smoke that might lead to the fire in your engine room of the model doing something it shouldn't be doing.
Excellent thought. So what I've gleaned from this, and of course we prepared this along the way, is it'd be useful to have a graphical view of the model. You've waxed lyrical about the compare function, and we want to show you some filters and some intelligence around how you do those compares. To be able to document, collaborate, and share those models. And so that's what we're going to do. And indeed provide an audit trail, because if you're dealing both internally and more importantly externally, how to do that. What we thought we'd do just before that, and we show the problem, is we're just going to run a short poll. And Andrew, if you wouldn't mind setting the poll up and running, and we're going to ask you some questions. And the idea of the questions is that we just want to know which of these criteria that we've just shared with you are relevant to you. So just take a few seconds and fill that in, and send us the information back, and we'll reveal the results of the poll. And the results have come in, and thank you very much for that. We're actually getting a split right across the board that generally it's about 25% for each of those. It's obviously a very balanced audience here, who've looked at each of those things about whether the graphics are useful, whether the compares are useful, and the ability to provide an audit trail and ability to document. So thank you very much for your feedback. We're now going to step on and look at the demonstration. So just give me a second while I swap over to that environment. So sitting on our screen here is actually the entry screen for CSM, Cloud Spreadsheet Manager, and I'm going to talk about one of our two capabilities today. We have two capabilities sitting on the screen. One is risk checks that actually does a quick assessment of how your spreadsheets are. So when you inherit them, how you want to look at them. That's not the aim of the demonstration today. What we are going to do is actually look at the compares process. So sitting across on here is actually I have a number of folders sitting within my teams and processes. I can look at this in a slightly different way. And this actually sets this up and shows me that I have two teams sitting here. One is my own personal folder, so everybody on CSM has their own personal folder, and a second one, which is a partner demo environment. We can look at that partner demo environment and actually see that there are multiple files within this particular finance report. Now, think about this folder as a project. So you may have a project for a particular model that you're running for a particular client. It's very discrete. You can determine who's in that project, both as an owner, reviewer, and approver. So we look at those different roles and their different capabilities. What we've done here, and we haven't gone through the process of actually comparing one of those, but we've loaded two models up. Here is my base model, which is called Finance Report version 1. And you'll see as a base model, it's got no changes or reviewers approvals because it's the base model. What we see as a second level here is the Finance Report version 2. It's telling me when that happened. It was done yesterday. It's got in here that there are some macros that have been changed, some VBA change. No data connections or links have been altered. There are some workbook changes. No name ranges, some workbook properties, and some cell changes that have been done. So this is a very quick overview of what we've got. We've also got some commentary here, and we'll pick up on this later, and whether this has been reviewed and approved. So I can immediately drill down on here by just clicking on any part of this row, and we get this dashboard view here. Now the dashboard view is showing us that version 1 is the previous file and version 2 is the current file. So it's telling me when what I'm comparing, when that was done, and by whom as well. So this was actually done by Jonathan. And we're seeing here that on that particular review, that we've got some changes in the macros, the number of counts of VBA references, workbook, and worksheet changes, and indeed cell changes here. You'll see on the corners of these particular cells here, there is some commentary. If the commentary is documentation, i.e. being able to collaborate with people that you've reviewed things, for example, they're marked in green. If they're issues or queries, they're marked in red. So now you're beginning to communicate to people that you've started reviewing this process. Let's have a look at the first of these on the macros. So what we have here on the left is the old version, and on the right is the new version of the macro being used in this particular workbook. It's telling us that this little point over here, very difficult to determine, but this little point has been changed and actually been replaced by this green text over here. So the green is showing the additions, the red is showing the deletions. It could come down to where you've got this A1 to T14. If this was changed over here, A1 to T15, it will pick up that little tiny change and tell me about it as well. And we'd actually document that piece as a part of the process. So that's a very simple review, and as you can see, some commentary has been added here as part of the process, and it says no problems with this change. So I'm communicating perhaps to the owner of this model that this has been reviewed and I have no issues with the changes that have been made. If I then come here and look at the second macro, a slightly different view, you'll see that this line has been deleted, and it's telling me where that has been deleted. And actually, if I scroll up and down here, that's the only change within that whole macro. Now, this macro could be thousands of lines long. The tool will find for you exactly where those macro changes are, even just where the rows have been inserted or deleted, as the case may be. Again, you can see commentary here, and again, the commentary says, no issues with that change. So you can do this along here. Similarly, if you're looking at a VBA reference, we can determine whether a VBA reference has been changed. So you'll see that the object library has changed between these two versions. It's shown me what has changed, and specifically what the version number is, etc. Again, if I wish, I could put commentary in there and document that I've reviewed that and made comments on that. The same appears on worksheets. So you see here the 4 worksheets have been deleted. It's identified where they are, and I then know that I'm going to look out for that and where they've been referenced, and we'll come back onto that later on. Let's have a look at the cell changes, because this is probably one of the areas where it's hardest to do some of this piece of work. And we're going to start with statement final. Sitting on the left here, we have what we call a mini-map. A mini-map is a representation of the whole worksheet. It could be n columns wide and 10,000 rows deep. It will still fit within this picture here. So this picture will be sized to represent that. What we have sitting in here, we actually have an area that the product has determined that this is the range that it wishes to review. It's telling me that on this area, the tool itself has said this is a logical view of where that piece is, and we'll come back to how that's represented at the moment. It's telling me here that this red area here has actually got to change, but the rest of it is not changed per se. So therefore, that's an interesting point. But there's also this odd thing sitting down below as well, and we'll come back to what that is. The red cell here is telling me specifically what has changed and what has not. And it's actually set up also below. So this F14, which is this cell here, is also shown down below here. So it's telling me that something has changed, both on terms of the formula, as you can see, because it's had plus 100 added to it. It's giving me the value change and the percentage change as well. Now I could look at that sitting down below, and I can see exactly the same cell sitting here on F14. And if I want to, I can bring up this mini map again and actually look at this and review this as well at the same time. So I can toggle between these two views and actually look at that review. Now to the right of here, you'll see that we've actually got a number of filters that we have applied. And these filters are the intelligence that Cluster 7 and its compare tool have done as part of this process. We have determined that some rows have been deleted and some columns have been deleted. Now you as modelers will know that if you add or delete columns, this changes the whole dynamics of the spreadsheet. It changes all the logical positions of that. Unless you put some structure around that, it's very difficult to determine those changes. So we're saying, well, we're telling you that we've done this as part of our compare. We're allowing you to actually turn these things on and off as well. It may be that I just want to focus on the functions that have changed. If I click on this one here, I filter everything out on that model. And if I click on it again, and if I want to reset the filters, I can reset the filters back. I may want to look at data that has been deleted, and it's telling me that was the only one that was deleted. So it's giving me more information around where that is. So this is a very powerful way of whether you are developing your own model or indeed inheriting a model from a client, to actually have a look at this, but actually look about how they've changed that model from what you may have sent to them and what they've sent back. You'll see here it's also putting listing down here a list of the unique formula changes as well of what we want to do. So these filters can be turned on and off, and they can be reapplied. I'm going to introduce a slightly different aspect to this as well. We have up here a button called Recompare. And what Recompare does is say, Cluster 7 and CSM, you've done a fantastic job, but actually I don't think you really grasped how this spreadsheet, or this particular spreadsheet, or this worksheet is functioning. So the Recompare function says, I want to look at this in a different way. I don't believe that the areas that you set up for review are actually right for the compare, and I want to redetermine this. So in this particular instance, I'm going to take A1 to T36 as my range, and I'm going to reset this. And so by doing that, I enter the Recompare function. Now I can put in row headers, I can put column headers, I can add more value to this as I go along. But for this simple demonstration today, we're going to do this. So I use the Recompare, and by going back up the page again, you'll see now it's reviewing the whole worksheet as one contiguous area. and gives me slightly different results. It's now saying there's no row or headers deleted, and it's there. And I can go through the same filtering process as I did before. So that gives you the ability as a modeler to set your own ranges and set your own compares. We're trying to provide you the intelligence to make that a more beneficial process. If you don't like that, you can go back to where we were at the beginning and go back to there. And we do this worksheet by worksheet. So I can go through to a very complex one here where it's called, and it'll take a little while to load, called ISN data. So this is where it will actually have quite a few pages of information. And you'll see that in this particular sheet, you'll see there are thousands of rows. And actually, we've got quite a few inserts going in here, which are showing us recalcs. If I did, as I said before, if I didn't want to do the recalcs, I can turn this off, and I can turn this particular one. So I'm now looking for the change. Now, where is that change? Well, you can see the red right up here in D, and I can find that sitting down here in the same place. So it's sitting on D12. So it's found that change in amongst all those thousands of rows and data, even though there have been some rows and things, some columns deleted as well. So it gives you the ability to find and determine those things very quickly, and at any point I can reset all this and I go back to where I want to at the beginning. Quick and easy view. So let's go on to the last thing, that a couple other things. So we talked earlier about a graphical model. So this is a very simple view of the graphical model that we have here. We see that working from left to right, we have how the steps with the arrows of how the data comes from this particular worksheet to this one, and finally to this one. We have a number of other worksheets here. The red ones, if you recall earlier, we talked about being deleted, so they're marked red. But the other spreadsheets, worksheets sitting here are also used, but they're not part of this particular model. I can look at this in a different way as well. We're looking here at a data flow layout, but if I use this menu over here, I can also look at this as an automated layout as well. So this is a particularly simple picture, but we're using that to do that. So if I look at just one of these and click on here, I can isolate that particular cell. If I click back on, I can see all the connections. Now, if you imagine that model was a very complicated model, and I'll go and show one of those in a second, then we can actually look at how this works. So let's go and step across to one of those other more complicated models. Any thoughts on that, Morten, while I'm working through this?
No, I guess I had a question around the worksheet links. Is that something that functionality that also sits in the risk check part of your offering, or is it just in the compare?
So Ian, if you're able to talk on the line, can you just comment on that, please?
Yeah, it's currently in the CSM products for compares only.
So, Morten, it's a good question. Our aim is actually to put that into the risk check piece as well.
Because conceptually it belongs there just as much as
absolutely.
Yeah.
This is a start point. This actually comes from our on-premise environment, but it actually sits there. In fullness of time, we'll also look at how we're going to link various workbooks together as well.
Yeah.
Okay. So this is a different view, and this is a more complex diagram. But what we can do here is actually I can drag this piece around, and if I want to, I can isolate various things. So you can see in this more complex model, I can actually turn things on and off as I wish, and reset it, and actually identify separate links. So if at any point I want to reset this, I just reset this back to here. It seems to jiggle itself around a bit. We're not quite sure why, but it does. But I can actually then pull out things and say, I just want to look at this particular worksheet here and see where that links to, and work on that particular piece. And then if I want to rebuild that piece again, I just click back on it and build that. So this hasn't got changes in this particular model here, but if you have models, looking at the legend here, it would have green where the things are added, blue if there's a change in the number of worksheet references, so it's counting the number of references within that. It's got red if it's been deleted, and the grey is it's just the same. That's where it is. And the lines are also in the same color code as well. So this helps, again, back to this inheritance process of looking at how that model is today. And I'm hoping that it appeals to you and your team of how when you gain something, it's a good way to understand it. But also when sharing it with the client, you can use this model to work through things as well.
Yeah. No, Tony, I think that the accessibility is the key thing here to me, which is the ability to collaborate with a client, through the cloud. Is something I haven't seen anywhere else. I mean, there are other tools that offer comparison functionality.
Yeah.
But what the problem with those tools is that they are, they're desktop based, and you can't really share and collaborate with the client. Whereas this is makes that possible, and on top of that it's a very nice graphical interface, and what you've added recently in terms of these worksheet links is is particularly sexy, I guess. It's kind of you just want to press on those buttons, don't you, to make it spin. So it's very appealing.
So one of the things, and I know I'm conscious I'm on a different workbook now, but one of these things is actually we've got a review and approval process. So all the comments, if I was on the same workbook, would actually look at the various references that have been changed, whether they've been documents or whether they've been queries or documents or changes, and they're captured in this timeline here, and actually would step you through those for you to review. So actually, perhaps the best thing is let's just step back to the other worksheet that I was working on, and actually just look at this review. And as you can see here, what we've got sitting in here is the various comments that have been made. So they are just documentation, they're not asking for any action, and somebody's reviewed it at that point, so it's got a big green tick. But an issue has been raised after that, which you would expect somebody to have a look at and discuss. So we're sitting here, and we've got at the top of the screen here that it has been reviewed, but now somebody could actually, if they got the approval function, and this is very separate within the teams, they can look at that, and indeed you can start setting a quality rating as well if you so wish. So the idea of this is that you then have an audit trail of that version being reviewed and approved and handed across. Okay. So we talked about these things, and hopefully you're seeing that we did the graphical view of the model. We compared the functions. We looked at how we could collaborate and share, and indeed we provided an audit trail. We talked a little bit about this graphical view, and I'm not going to talk further about this right now, but maybe just we can have a quick conversation on this, Morten. So we would create a view here of these benefits that come out of that. Have you any thoughts on how we describe that? Does those tally with your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, again, if we were to sort of begin to wrap up, I think there are two things that I would emphasize. One is just this idea of change-based assurance, right? that we need to think of gaining model confidence through monitoring very accurately and comprehensively changes in the model. That's something that can be done without Cluster 7. It can be done within a spreadsheet using a track sheet such as the ones that F1, F9 use, or it can be done now in a cloud-based way, which is new. And the second point relates to that, which is it allows you to collaborate with other people.
Mm-hmm.
It provides you I mean, it's more than just the compare. It's the what do you call it? I mean, it's the documentation sort of process, right? This ability to go through and tick things off on screen collaboratively, which I think is so appealing about this tool.
I think one of the things is that we've talked about using it internally, and I think there's a couple of things here. Is to actually use it internally, hopefully to reduce cost because it shortens the review period, but also to expedite the reviews. The reviews are probably broader in their concept. It's not that people aren't reviewing it, but everything is captured there and it's documented there. Is that a fair comment?
Well, possibly, but I would say for us, that's not where we are. That's not why we're looking at it, because we feel we've got our internal process covered.
Okay.
So this is, if you like, purely because it allows us to bring the client into the process. And to some extent allow the client to self-serve, which I think is also back to the sort of introductory comment. I think our challenge and our duty as professionals is to try to open up what we're doing to a much wider audience, including the end user.
So you stole my next bullet then. So it's to actually wrap your services around that piece and allow your client to self-monitor. In the end, I just wonder, one of the thoughts we have is that actually clients may bring their models to you, i.e. models that you haven't built, that they may wish to self-monitor as well by using the platform.
That's right. So there's a snake oil salesman in me. So he sees this as a foot in the door, as a slippery slope where we get all their spreadsheets out of them eventually.
So
there's a slippery slope.
Well, it's supposed to be a yellow big road, but you could be the slippery slope as well. But no, thank you very much, Morten, for that. Thank you very much for your thoughts and input. We had one question on the line from Alexander, and Alexander, I will follow up with you after that. But thank you very much for your time. If there are any other questions, please post them now. Otherwise, I'm going to thank Morten once again for his thoughts and comments. It's much appreciated, and also for your working with us on this. And hopefully this has been very interesting, and we'll follow up with people as they come through. Thank you very much. Goodbye.
Thank you. Bye.